special meeting of Goodyear City Council, October 20, 2008. Would you please join Councilmember Souza in the Pledge of Allegiance and invocation? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Heavenly Father, we pray that you guide this council in its deliberations this evening for the betterment of all who live in this city. We ask that you protect the men and women, employees of our city, and the functions they perform for this community on a daily basis. We ask that you take into your arms those of our military who have given their lives to bring democracy to the countries of Iraq and Afghanistan. For those that remain, bring them home safely as soon as possible. We pray also for our nation and its citizens during this time of financial difficulty. Let the crisis end and stability spread across our country. We ask all this in your name, amen. Amen. You might want to know why I get a frog in my throat. I have a grandson serving in Iraq his second term, and I always think about him at this hour. Thank you.
All members of council are here this evening. We have no expenditures to approve or ratify. We do have a very significant communications item, however, and I'd ask Betsy Rice if she'd lead that off for us.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. It is my pleasure to be here before you this evening. As you know, earlier this month we announced the Mayor and Council's Awards for Citizenship, and tonight we are very pleased to be presenting our very first award in this program to a member of our community who showed valor in saving the life of another. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to Mayor Kavanaugh so that he can share a little bit of the story and present this award to a very deserving member of our community.
Thank you, Betsy. John Camion, would you please come up? Mayor and Council Outstanding Citizenship Award for Valor, presented to Goodyear resident John Camion for an exceptional act of courage and heroism in saving the life of a stranger in peril. On the morning of August 8, 2008, Goodyear resident John Camion was driving eastbound on Interstate 10 through Phoenix when he was forced to stop in traffic due to an accident. Acting on instinct, Mr. Camion drove through traffic using the emergency lane to see if he could help. This is where he saw the source of the accident, a rolled-over truck engulfed in flames. He rushed to the fiery truck and saw the driver, Jose Mongas, screaming for help, unable to get out. Mr. Camion went back to his vehicle and retrieved a 6-foot pipe, which he used to break the windshield and pull Mr. Mongas to safety. Mr. Camion's brave actions that day saved a life and demonstrated unparalleled citizenship with honor and valor. We have this particular certificate, and we have a plaque we'd like to present to John. Mayor and Council, Outstanding Citizenship Award for Valor. This is the first time we've ever presented this. I hope there's more of them. And I think there will be. But John, you're the first one. To John Camion, in recognition of your selfless courage and bravery in saving the life of Jose Mongas, October 2008. John, it's an honor to be standing next to you. And all of us in Goodyear just overjoyed with the fact that you're one of our residents. You're our neighbor, and you have demonstrated courage. You not only responded to it, you took a proactive move to get it resolved. and you saved someone's life. Think of that.
Oh, I know.
You saved someone's life. So I want to thank everybody for coming out today. I think John deserves that. But also, I'd like to, if council would come forward, we'd like to shake John's hand. But first, John, how do you feel about this?
Very proud.
Anything else?
I'm pretty shocked about it. I thank the town of Goodyear. I it happened in Phoenix. I know I'm a resident of Goodyear, and I appreciate this from everybody from Goodyear.
Well,
There's several. Actually, Sun Devil Fire, we work as a team. This would have never happened. I started out with Sun Devil on a little bumpy road. Randy decided to keep me. He knew I'd be of value to the company. There are several things. If he wouldn't have kept me, Jose may not be here. There's other people like Adam Bellamy. He was supposed to work with me that morning. He was 45 minutes late. If he would have been on time, we probably would have been out of there 45 minutes early and never would have been on the scene of the accident. I just can't say anything else. It's just... Thank you so much for your brief.
What can we say?
Yeah, I've been in the town of Goodyear for 2.5 years.
Okay. What if I can do?
Congratulations. Thank you very much.
Come up here.
Okay.
If I can get you all to get as close as possible.
Sorry, John. I'm getting really personal.
And one more. 1, 2, 3. Okay, very good.
Thank you very much.
One more left in you. Hi, I'm his daughter. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming very much.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys. I thank everybody too.
Oh, I guess everybody.
All warning.
I didn't realize that.
All right. That's what I said. Hear that?
Okay.
is my daughter Allie. Son Tyler, my wife Mary. They want to use school today. Everybody know they left
Good. There's some cuties in this group, huh? I think you have there. You think they are?
Hey, thank you very much.
Thanks for running. Bye-bye.
How old is that guy? 4? 3? My son's the same size. Just like Robin.
What a wonderful thing. That was great.
Thank you.
Now the public's not here.
You lost your public. You lost.
And it's nice that Channel 3 came too.
Yes, absolutely.
Good job. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, the suits come in now.
Let's see. Three consent items.
Okay, I'm ready.
Oh, I feel better already now.
Yeah, I'm leaving after this.
The hamburger doesn't have to be saved.
Kenny? Hamburgers are going to be
You're
cooked.
gonna still be hungry?
Oh, yeah. Jeez, I haven't eaten yet.
Well, I was wondering, I'm just looking around at everything seems to be kind of empty here.
Thanks for
No,
coming.
no, that
Sit over there. I was
Wipe
making you
that
lose your
out,
seat.
so. No, I got, that's just
Giving
an
you a hard time.
appetizer.
Sorry. Figured I'd. Okay.
Nothing else.
Read this.
Okay, if we could pick up the meeting, we just completed communications, and we're now citizen comments, opportunity for any citizen to comment, express their view to this council for any item that is not on this evening's agenda. So for any non-agenda item, are there any comments from the public? Seeing none, we'll move to the consent agenda, and I'll ask the city clerk to read them A through C by title only, please.
Item A, adopt Resolution 08-1262, approving the issuance and sale of not to exceed $36,550,000 aggregate principal amount of the City of Goodyear, Arizona Public Improvement Corporation Municipal Facilities Revenue Bonds, Series 2008, authorizing the execution and delivery of a ground lease, a lease purchase agreement, a trust indenture, a continuing disclosure certificate, an assignment agreement, a bond purchase agreement, and related documents authorizing the delegation of duties to certain officers, ratifying the preparation and distribution of preliminary official statement, and authorizing the finalization, execution, and distribution of an official statement, authorizing the taking of all other actions necessary to the consummation of the transaction contemplated by this resolution and declaring an emergency. Item B, adopt Ordinance 08-1142, amending provisions of the Goodyear City Code, Chapter 14, to correct provisions on the unauthorized use of water and waste of water to include water utilities within the protection of the city's jurisdiction. Item C, 1, accept the Urban Area Security Initiative Grant Award from the Arizona Department of Homeland Security in the amount of $750,000 and authorize the mayor to sign all documents with regard to the UASI grant award. Item C2, adopt Resolution 08-1265, authorizing the mayor to execute an intergovernmental agreement for participation in the Phoenix Urban Area Chemical, Biological, Radiological, Nuclear Explosive Response for Law Enforcement Program between the Arizona Department of Homeland Security and the City of Goodyear. Participation in this IGA will allow the city to receive $750,000 for the purchase of a Lenco Bearcat tactical vehicle, a support vehicle, and a tactical robot.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone in the public wish to remove an item from the consent agenda? Would anyone on council wish to remove an item from the consent agenda?
I have a question.
Yes?
With the attorney.
Yeah, go
Mr.
ahead.
Massey, should I recuse myself on that item?
Well, how about to give to that, why don't you go ahead and recuse yourself?
I'm sorry?
Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I will take, let's not take chances. Then I will ask to recuse myself on item A.
Okay, let's do B and C while you're here. Any removal of B and C? Okay, could I have a motion then to approve 7, B and C, please?
Move that we adopt items 7, B, and C as read by the clerk.
Second.
Motion from Vice Mayor Antoniak and a second from Councilmember Holland. Roll call vote, please.
Vice Mayor Antoniak,
Aye.
Councilmember Sousa,
Aye.
Councilmember Cavalier,
Aye.
Councilmember Lord,
Aye.
Councilmember Holland,
Aye.
Councilmember Osborne,
Aye.
Mayor Kavanaugh.
Aye.
Passes 7-0.
Okay, Councilmember Cavalier is recusing himself from number 7A, which is the resolution to authorize issuance and sale of municipal facility revenue bonds. Any questions or comments on that one? Okay, could I have a motion on that,
I move we
please?
adopt Resolution 081262 as read by the city clerk.
Second.
Motion from Councilmember Lord and a second from Councilmember Souza. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Sousa,
Aye.
Councilmember Lord,
Aye.
Councilmember Holland,
Aye.
Councilmember Osborne,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Antoniak,
Aye.
Mayor Kavanaugh.
Aye.
Passes 6-0.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Cavalier is returning to the dais. We'll now move to business. We have 3 items on our business agenda. Items A and B will be presented together as they relate to the City Center Phase 1, and Brian Dahlke will present both.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. If I could have the presentation up, please. There we go. So tonight, the long-awaited, it's been about 20 years in process to get to this point, and we have an opportunity to be bringing 2 agreements for you to consider tonight. Those will be a development agreement that includes both the public and the private side of the city center, as well as the option to lease agreement, and that will really focus on the private development side. Very quickly, we however this gets voted on tonight, up or down, did want to just take a brief second and thank the Langford team. This has been a lot of work in working together, understanding economic times have hit us. We put in some delay provisions and some other things to really protect us along the way. And they've been very patient with us and understanding, so thank you very much. With the Langford team, they will not be presenting tonight, but if asked questions, are certainly here, led by Rob Langford. Rob, raise your hand real quickly. Mary Pampu, that's also part of Langford. Eric Judson, whom you recognize, JMI Sports, and Eric Wilson with Phelps Development. So that's our team here. And they certainly can answer any questions that they come up later. For the city team, if you've been involved in this, just stand up real quickly. Don't need to go through all the intros, but just so council's aware of who's been working on this. And also Linda that just walked back in. So it's been a team effort as always, but very thankful for Frank Tompkins. All the contracts, the agreements you see in front of you, he has been the person putting all this stuff to paper. And Frank, you've done a remarkable job, so appreciate it. We also don't have Dave Scholl tonight, but he was helping us looking at things from a private developer perspective. So With that, that's our team. And okay, just for the public that may be viewing this, City of Goodyear's 40-acre site south of I-10 on Astoria Parkway, and you'll see it in green here. And of course, this presentation will be available through the city's website. Project history, won't go into a lot of detail. Once again, it's been a 20-year process, and you'll see the boxes up there. But one of the things I would like to point out, there's been a tremendous amount of public input over the years, and certainly think back to the City Center Technical Advisory Committee. Councilmember Lord shared that with Jamie Cavalier, so thank you for your leadership as well. And it's great to see us at this point. So we went through this process. Goodyear, our Langford team has been selected. They will be referred to as Goodyear Civic Center developers. And the team, as I talked about a minute ago, is comprised off over to my left. Public-private partnerships. The whole approach on this has been one of P3, or public-private partnerships. Obviously, the benefit to the public is we share in the costs of things. We get this up and running faster. We are able to reduce our financial costs, as I said before, and with our limited resources. We share in the risk. We share in infrastructure. We share in the success of the project. And finally, we get to access a team that we think is talented and can deliver this project. On the private side, they're looking at this because they think it can do a positive return on investment. And the other thing is it helps them, when you reduce their risk, get into this market a lot easier because they can lease versus purchasing. And they, the entitlements are already done. We're doing the zoning for them, so they don't have to worry about that. And then lastly, sharing in the public infrastructure. So those are some of the benefits to them. And I think that they've already seen a lot of opportunity in this city. So phase one, this is what we're going to see, and this will be up and running January 2011 is what it's slated for. You'll see in phase one on the public side, it includes the infrastructure, and you'll see that the roadways are in green on this particular slide. It includes a library estimated at 30,000 square feet, and also City Hall at 110,000 square feet. And you say, well, the buildings look similar. Well, one's single story, the other's 4. So that's a difference there. But City Hall will be about 110,000 square feet. And those amenities that you see in their phase one will be there first day. The developer is looking at putting in phase one a 120,000 square foot office facility. It'll have retail on the lower floor. And that's one of the parcels they're looking at coming out of the ground first on. And we can see that a little better on a slide here in a second. Now the milestone. We are going to adhere to schedules. We are looking at, if this gains approval tonight, October 27th, we hit the ground running. We start the programming. We have 6 weeks with which to pull the programming together. And one of the provisions we put in here is to at least let's look at the library potentially even fitting in phase one City Hall. Don't know if it'll work or not. You have to look at adjacencies, expansion of future spaces, those types of things. But that'll be a decision that we'll be facing within 6 weeks after, around the first week in December when we have to make that decision. But it's one we put in there to at least take a look at. Why? Because it could do some substantial cost savings. The other dates that you see in there, the site plan, July of 09, we'll have that done. The council will be involved. You'll have an opportunity to look at the site plan, review the site plan elevations. Absolutely, it's very important to get input on that as well as city council chambers. So that'll be built into some of the timelines as well. And then the other thing is we have until September of next year, a little bit ahead of myself, but essentially that will be at a point of no return. When we get to that point, we'll have an opportunity to go forward, delay it 3 years, or potentially just walk away from the project at that point. Okay? So aggressive schedule, but we're very confident we can meet it. Now looking at the City Center for build-out, what we have in front of us, you'll see the build-out. City Hall is now at 238,000 square feet. Performing Arts Center, it's a box on there right now. You'll see it as Parcel G. That is, as you know, it's going through a market assessment right now to look at the type of venues and the type of facility that should be there. We'll have that study completed November or December. You'll see the library there, as we talked about, and the multi-gen. And then at build-out, you'll see that they're looking at close to 1.2 million square feet of private. The gray boxes are contemplated as far as being parking, structured parking. All the yellow boxes on here will be privately developed. Mixture of retail, mixture of office, mixture of residential. So, Phase 1 scope and budget. This has already been presented to council in work session. So just very briefly, we're looking at a $67 million budget for this. That $67 million budget includes FF&E or fixtures, furniture, and equipment, includes the books for the library. So this is an all-in budget estimate for us at this point. Interim financing. Larry had an opportunity to present this to you, but just as a recap, we are looking at a city cash flow up until we get to that point of GMP, or guaranteed maximum price, or what we'd also call construction contracts. We're going to cash flow that from development fees that we already have in hand. That's going to be about $3.9 million that we're funding this through next September. That is a risk to the city. So that's money that we're spending on the engineering, the design, all the elements of putting this together. But I would also say once we reach that point, once again, we'll have an opportunity to truly go forward or delay at that point. We have on there the COPs, certificates of participation, and you'll see that those come in. Those will actually be sold in June of '09 is what we're looking at, and that'll actually be the cash. That will provide the cash for the construction, but the city doesn't start paying those payments until we actually get the. We start making payments when we will be doing interest-only loans at the point where we, until such time as we do general obligation bond financing, as Larry talked about previously. Permanent financing, this has been laid out to you before. We have a combination of GO bonds for buildings, for infrastructure, development impact fees, and then the general fund. Hits the general fund in 2010, 2011 is what we're looking at. And it is noted that we have $45.5 million worth of authority from our voters over a series of bond elections, but a total of $45.5 million. So that's the authority that we have to work with. The business points, it's very clear that we are going to be designing this to conform with both the general plan, city center specific area plan. So it will be consistent with that. We want this thing to be energy efficient, so we will look at the different levels of what we call LEED influenced or LEED certified, and that'll be part of our programming and look at construction costs. The policy of council is that's important for us, and we want to make sure that we make a statement with this building. So I talked about before, once we get to GMP and we want to just step back, maybe we're not sure where the economy is, maybe the assessed valuations aren't growing where we thought. So we do have that 36-month provision from next September. So ostensibly it's about a 4-year time frame that we can wait to pull the trigger on this, up to 36 months. And as I stated previously, we get to September and we decide we're not going forward, period. All these contracts are null and void, so they go away. On the business points in the development agreement, we had a whole lot of items that were prohibited uses. I had Kim Benden do a count on that, 68 defined prohibited categories. And we patterned that off of the area around the ballpark, but we added to it. And you've had an opportunity to review that previously. The other thing that we're doing is parking. It's expensive for structured parking. It's more expensive for underground parking. So initially, we will be doing surface parking, and we're going to be looking at when does the market or the amount of activity there really determine when we need parking garages. So we have not determined a date certain, but it's something that we know that we're going to be working on in the future together. The last point on there is we're looking at the options. The Goodyear City Center, LLC, they have an opportunity over the next 16 years to take down options. And as part of that, they will be exercising their rights to take down. And we're looking at 5 different takedowns. And what that means is that's just agreeing to or paying for leasing city property for private development. So that's, but one of the things that we did is we wanted to keep that time frame constrained. So it's during their option period of 16 years, and then after that, if they've not exercised all their options, their ability to then option after that goes away. So you'll see that we put a lot of time frames and deadlines into this agreement. Very important that we keep this dynamic and moving along. This is just I like the visuals, and this just basically tells you what the timeline is for them for the Langford team taking down the options. The first one you'll see is in 2011, and if they decide not to do that, then they pay a penalty, and it moves on to the next time frame. So potentially they could go out as late as 2014, but by that time they'd be paying 2 different penalty payments to the city to extend the time frame. They're certainly not looking at doing that, but it helps us to really create the incentive to develop earlier rather than later. And you'll see this carry on all the way through, and their last time to exercise options is in 2024. I'm going to be retired then, so we'll pass that along to the younger crowd.
I am too.
You are too? Okay. Business points on the development agreement. We talked about this previously. 2% on the development fee, and that is for hard and soft construction costs. What that means is both for the bricks and mortar and then also for the architectural, engineering, all those soft costs that are related to it. 2.5% construction management fee is strictly for those, primarily the hard costs. We talked to you earlier, the going rate's about 5%. We're at 4.5%, but we're actually less than that because, again, we're removing soft costs from the construction management fee. So we think we've done very well there. The other thing, you'll notice that we do have a reimbursement budget of $150,000 for them. That is only up until they complete construction. That is capped at $150,000 over about a 26-month period.
Brian, there's a question that you'd like to ask.
Oh, I'm sorry.
A question specifically to the construction management fee. Items not included include the litany of things that you've pointed there, but we're not going to get charged 2.5% on the taxes that we pay for construction sales tax. Right? You see what I'm saying? The reverse of that isn't true either, is it?
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. And let's see. We were the developer has a right of first refusal. That's for the 16 years. And what that means is right now we're not looking at selling any of this property. It's been the policy of council to let's look at first leasing this out. We intend to take that approach. But at some point during that 16-year period, during their option period, if the city does in fact decide to sell off some of the property, we would give them that first right to purchase it. That's all that means. Once again, today we're not looking at doing any sales. This is the other agreement, the option to lease, and the options. This is where we get into some long-term game planning. Quite frankly, we're talking a 55-year lease. with 4 10-year options, and that is a considerable amount of time. And we have a nice little chart that will show you on that exactly what that means. But at the end of the lease period, we own the buildings. The city owns all these capital improvements, so that's a good thing. The other thing that you'll see on here that's a key point is we get $1.5 million in what we call the development buy-in, but essentially it's their rights to be able to take down the property. $1.5 million, and it's done over 3 phases. First one is after approval of the agreement, so tomorrow, Rob, I think we'll have a $500,000 check in our hands. Dies for lack of a second. But very soon after the agreements. And then after the design documents, and then finally at contract, we get the last $500,000. This is one where coterminous with expiration of first lease, including extensions. What does that mean? We talked about this briefly in work session, but all the leases end at one time. I have a slide right after that that kind of unveils it. And then the other is as their leases come to expire, if they go past the expiration date, say they get a big tenant that wants a 15-year lease, and 5 years before their land leases would expire, we would have an ability to review those as a city because it would extend into our ownership period. So we put that provision in there as well. Kim Benden worked on this one. We kind of agonized how best to present this visually, but what you'll see is in 2011, assuming they do their first option then, that brown line, that will go out to 2066, so that's 55 years. At that point, then they can do a 10-year option after that, another 10-year, and a total of 4 times. But you'll see what happens is we're looking at 2106 for all of the options to expire. Now, if they take down their last option in 2024, they don't get that 50 plus 10 4-year options. It all ends the time of their first lease expiration. That's what you call coterminous lease expiration. I don't often bet, but I would bet that a lot of us aren't going to be around in 2106. However, we are in the forever business in cities, and we're absolutely looking to this in the future, so we protect ourselves. A couple more slides. Lease rates, we establish this via an appraisal method. We agree on appraiser, we get it appraised. The rent rates, they start off at 4%, and it actually jumps up to 8% when either one of the first 2 things happens. They hit a 30-month period of time from when they've exercised that lease, or they're 95% occupancy in that building. But either way, it does jump up to that 8%. As we talked to council before, this was substantiated by market studies, and we have looked closely at that. I've already talked about we're not selling land. The other thing we want to protect is when they start building, when they lease, we want them to build. When they start to build, we want them to finish, as do they. So we put a provision in there that they have 2 years to start construction after they take down the lease, and then 2 years to finish. We also have provisions in there if they delay for X amount of days, depending on the circumstances, city can actually come in and take it over. We've seen projects in other parts of the valley where things have started vertical and just stopped, and we do not want that in our city centers, so we put that provision in there. Oh, the last thing, it's not a bullet on here, but they are going to be funding additional rent payment, and that is for infrastructure, so we will be getting monies from them. At the end of the day, they'll be funding about 70% of the infrastructure at full build-out. Okay, we're at the recommendation, drum roll after 20 years of working on this, and that is we're asking council to approve both the development agreement and also the option to lease. And then just to let you know, the next steps is we, a week from now, jump right into the programming, a very comprehensive, intensive 6-week period. We'll be working on CC&Rs later. Covenants, conditions, restrictions that will govern the whole site. So make sure that we're all keeping it clean and noise and all those types of things. And we will be having work sessions with council, talk about design, programming updates. We want to keep you informed. And the zoning will actually be completed by HDR. That's one of their final responsibilities, so they will be doing the zoning for this. But the design guidelines will be developed by the Langford team. So that will be married with that zoning. And then we're looking at a bond sale in 2010. So with that, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Before I ask for comments from the public?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Roar. I want to make sure HDR architecture, not HDR engineering, and the letter that's on file with me still applies?
It would still apply, but it has nothing to do with the matter tonight.
Okay, just want to make sure. I've asked you before, but I heard it, I wanted to ask. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, it's now opportunity for anyone in the public who would like to comment on either of these two items, the development agreement or the lease opportunity. Would the private member of the public-private partnership wish to comment? Okay, thank you. All right, seeing no comments from the public, we'll start with the development agreement from the standpoint of reading the resolution. I would ask that the clerk, Lynn, if you'd read that, please.
Adopt Resolution 08-1263, approving a development agreement between the City of Goodyear and Goodyear Civic Center Developers, LLC, to facilitate the development of the city center, a development generally located on the northwest corner of Estrella Parkway and Yuma Road.
Could I have a motion to approve the resolution?
Mr. Mayor.
Can I have a motion?
Second.
And a second. I have a motion from Councilmember Cavalier and a second from Councilmember Holland. To the council, if we're open for discussion, certainly you're welcome to discuss the lease agreement now also. They certainly overlap in some respects.
So either one.
Start with Councilmember Holland.
I just wanted to say, this was very good. We've come a long way in 20 years. You're probably pretty excited yourself. The lead influence design, as it involves the reclaimed water, is great because I'm a water person, so I'm just very pleased that you guys are looking at that and really concentrating on it. It's important to me. It's important to the city. One question that I have to ask about the books that are going into the library. Many of the books that are needed for university accreditation are very, very expensive. And we have talked with the university, and we know exactly what they're looking for and what has to be on the shelves. Is that what you're saying?
Mr. Mayor and Councilmember Holland, we have not got to that level of specificity with them. Our commitment absolutely is both to to both universities, looking, and with the county also that would be operating the library.
Sure.
So we're using the county library model for that. But there's a commitment to work closely with the universities once we get into the programming side of the library. As far as the books and what's going in there, we're not even there yet.
Yes, and I know that, but I guess the concern that I have is that since we know that there has to be certain ones, or our universities won't be approved for operation. And they made that very clear when I had some of my meetings with them, that was important to them. So just want to kind of pass that on.
Thank you.
Okay. Again, thank you. We're very excited about this and glad to have you guys with us tonight.
Thank you. Councilmember Cavalier.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Brian, for a very complicated and very involved presentation. I hope we can get something out of this. We've been through it enough times. We should know, but there's a concern I have with this time frame. 2014 is a possible time frame to go out on. In other words, we have time. We have until 2014 to make a decision whether or not we want to go ahead or not go ahead. Is that what that is? I need a little more specificity.
I was trying to jump over to that slide, but it's if you could pull up the milestone schedule, appreciate that. What that means on the Milestone Schedule, it's the anticipation that we will enter into contracts September of next year, of '09. The provision that we put in there is to extend up to 36 months.
But
So
that's for us to extend
that's our
that,
prerogative.
not for not for Langford.
That's correct.
Okay.
We anticipate City Hall, Library being in advance, and I believe their current plan is about a year out or so before they would have their buildings, their first building up.
Okay, so everything has to be done by 2024. All options have to be taken and everything completed, or those options in place where it's still maybe some of the latter part may be still under construction. I'm not quite sure I understand that.
That's correct. After they take down their option,
Yes.
and that option period, remember, they do have an ability to go from 2011 out to 2014, so they themselves have a 3-year window with which to work if they pay penalties. So we'd actually go that last date, 2026, is it 2026?
2024, I thought.
2024, they could extend 3 years past that
Okay.
for all takedowns. Now, they are required, though, once they do a takedown of property or a lease of property, they will then be required to construct within 2 years.
Okay, on the earlier, on the first slides where you showed us the layout, you had the multi-gen and the PAC, Performing Arts Center. Those two you had laid out with a certain size already specified. Now, I understand your City Hall has been specified because you've done the research on that. Every department has had input. You know what that's going to be. You know what the library approximately is going to be size-wise, or needs to be. So that's pretty much in place. I'm not certain that you know what we need size-wise for multi-gen or the Performing Arts Center. And yet you have specified a certain square footage, 80,000 and 70,000, as specified in your document here. So is that just a guess, or is that are we able to give and take on either of those?
Mr. Mayor and Councilmember Cavalier, actually, all these are estimates at this point. Even City Hall, our best estimate now is 110,000 square feet for Phase 1. We will finalize that once we get into programming and really look at what the space requirements are. Same with the second expansion of City Hall. The library, we're pretty settled on 30,000 square feet unless we get because the county drives that, unless we get participation from the universities.
Right.
The other two, Performing Arts Center and Multigen, those are estimates based on HDR's initial master plan, but those can change too. So those are just placeholders right now.
Okay. We're not relying on anyone to give us that number yet. Okay.
No.
The study's not done, right?
The marketing study will assess what is
Yes.
needed.
I understand that. That's why I say, because the marketing study hasn't even been completed on that yet. And then the other thing going on, Langford as a construction company, are you okay with building on leased land? And the city, it's not typical that a city owns land and leases out land, or owns land and leases out the land for someone to build on, and then take that land and they then lease it to their tenants. And I assume that's what we're talking about, right?
Want to take them?
And how will that work out? I mean, and my concern is, are you okay with that?
Mayor and Councilman Cavalier, yes, we are. We've got a series of projects, Councilman Cavalier, that we've done on ground leases, not necessarily from cities, but from private enterprise and private landowners. And it's becoming more and more of a, as we see in the market, public-private market, more and more of a popular way for cities like the City of Goodyear to take advantage of assets they've got in land that they don't intend to put to public purpose to generate long-term income stream. Because, again, you're very typical. Very few cities or counties or governments want to sell their assets, but they do want to monetize them. They do want to get cash flow. And this is what we're doing here is a very kind of a typical example of how that works. From our perspective, quite often developers might say, well, it's tough to finance on a ground lease. Well, it is a little tough, but we've probably done more ground lease financings than we've done fee financings. And I don't know why that is. It's just a series of circumstances, I think. But we're quite comfortable, and our financing, both debt and equity, have done this with us. So I think it's a good structure for us. It works for us. Brian mentioned the 95 years. That's, when you get in these kind of long-term ground leases, you think that's a long time. It is a long time. But that's where lenders will say, if you get any shorter than 70 years or 65, they just won't finance it. So, again, this comes from our experience in terms of what it's going to take to finance.
So over the long term, you can come out on this so that it would be profitable for you.
Yeah.
See, what I don't want to have happen is something get partially built, and then something happens to your company because, oh, wait a minute, we can't do this, and you walk off and leave it, and the city is in a position to, or I should say not in a position financially to be able to take that over. Here is a partial construction, and something has happened to your company. We take over as a city, and we're not sure we can finish this, the financial side of finishing this, and here we have a partially constructed building or buildings, and that's my concern for the city side. So,
and I appreciate that, but I think the several responses. One, we have a very strong relationship with Hensel Phelps Construction. Eric Wilson is here, and Phelps Development, and they, in cases like this, always provide a performance and payment bond, or in some cases a completion guarantee, which they're prepared to provide here. Okay. So, and that completion guarantee or performance and payment bond doesn't just go to us, the developer, as their client. It goes to
the city.
Could go to the city, could go to the banks, it could go to our equity partners, and quite often that's exactly what happens because of exactly.
So that assurance is built in
yeah.
to this, so that if anything happens, there would be the funds to finish that
yeah.
and complete that project.
Right. Because your interests in this case are much like our lenders and much like our equity partners.
I suppose that's true. Yeah, yeah. A bank doesn't want this back.
Right.
Okay. Thank you very much, man.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Comments?
Mr. Langford, I might as well keep you up there just one quick second. In reading our COAC, it says that Hensel Phelps, Carrier Johnson, JMI Sports, and yourself, Langford Associates, are all part of this Goodyear Civic Center Developers, LLC, Delaware. Is there anyone else, any other investors involved in that? If I went to Delaware Corporation Commission or the like of that, what would I read on the corporate documents there?
Those are the 4 members.
Okay.
And my company is a managing member.
Okay.
And there are 4 partners or members.
Okay.
Now, again, Vice Mayor, when we get into the private sector developments,
yep.
Depending on how large they are, we sometimes, more often than not, bring in equity partners, depending on how much equity is required, how much we want to put in, how much we bring in from third parties. So if we get to that, and those will be separate LLCs. That won't be the same LLC that we're using to develop the public structures, but it will be the same group that'll create a separate entity to develop all the private parcels. And in that case, we very likely would bring in an equity partner as an investor in that entity. So in that case, if you went to the Delaware registrar, you'd see another name in there, right. Most likely. But that won't have anything to do with the public facility contract that we're talking to you tonight about.
But okay. And then do we, I was trying to find it in here, and maybe this is a question for staff now. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your answer on that. If there's a change in ownership in that LLC, or there's a change in leadership in that LLC, like we have in development agreements throughout the city, do they have to come to us for approval of that. I was trying to find it, and maybe you articulated it and I missed it.
Vice Mayor, that's correct, and I would ask Frank Tompkins with Gus Rosenfeld to finish addressing that, how we're protected.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, there are restrictions in their ability to assign their interests. They have limited rights to assign as long as Mr. Langford remains as the controlling person, if you will, because we are relying on his expertise in terms of developing this project. But other than under certain very narrow circumstances, they would have to come to the city and get approval for any assignment of their rights.
So if Langford got acquired by a larger company, for instance, they would have to come back to us to assign the rights to that larger company?
Correct.
Okay.
Because he would, unless Mr. Langford is in charge, then they have to come to us. In a nutshell, that's.
Okay. Good deal. That's it for now. I may ask some follow-ups based on others.
Okay, Councilmember Osborne.
Okay. This wasn't rocket science, but I had a lot of questions. I will have to start off by saying, I do feel more comfortable about this whole project with the 3-year option of delaying it. I do appreciate that. I know with everything that we've gone through, that is important. A few things offhand. Okay. As in phasing of everything we've seen, and I know it doesn't totally apply here, but what is the phasing of our actual park that is with this? I mean, nothing is ever mentioned about that park is in the timeline, and so I wondered, could you please?
Mayor and Councilmember Osborne, are you referring to the park that's up part of the 100 acres with the university? Absolutely not part of these agreements.
I know.
So we can get you an answer on that, though, as far as what the timing is for that.
Okay.
But
That's fine.
if we can get back to you on that.
When we talk about LEED certification, does that include solar?
LEED can include a lot of those types of elements.
Doesn't
Does it include solar?
Okay. 'Cause I'd like it to, so okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's.
Okay. Kind of following up on Rob's questions in a different way, though. It's our land. We're leasing it to a company that's building a building that then will in turn lease it to multiple businesses. If for some reason something happened to the ownership of that building, how are we protecting all those businesses within that building that will be sitting on our city center site? How does that play?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Osborne, there's in the lease, in the form of lease that is part of the option to lease agreement, the city agrees that they will, there's what's called non-disturbance language in the lease, which basically means that we agree that as long as those subtenants or sublessees are complying with the terms of their lease that they originally entered into with the Langford Group or whoever, we will recognize their rights to stay in there as long as they're not in default, or the city will recognize their rights to stay in there. So that's how they're, I think that's, if I'm not answering your question, let me know, but I think that was your question, is how are they protected if the lease with Langford goes away? How are the subtenants protected?
Right.
And that's basically as long as they comply, it becomes essentially a lease between the city and those subtenants.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And as long as they comply with their lease, they get to stay in.
Okay.
So.
Okay. How often will the land be appraised?
The land is appraised at each of the options. So and then at their extension of options be reappraised at that point. So during the initial takedown, and they're looking at 5 different takedown or lease periods, and then when we get into the extensions, so those 10-year rolling options.
I know that you mentioned within the zoning we'll have the design guidelines, which you probably were going to mention, but I would specifically also like to be looking at sign design guidelines specifically for this area. And on the list of prohibited uses, I know we talked about that a lot previously. A couple of things that's on here. For example, I mean, traveling carnival is on here. So does that mean that if we ever wanted to have some kind of event on city grounds there, that we couldn't have? I mean, I hate to say it's not a traveling carnival, I guess, but are we biting ourselves with that?
Isn't it a special permit?
That would likely be a special permit for any of those temporary events.
And it's funny, I know that this comes to me, but in here I saw that it was mentioning plating, or electric plating type of things.
Plating works in electric
Now, does
plating.
that mean an actual company that only does that cannot be there? That doesn't mean that a tenant is not allowed to do that, is it?
It's really trying to keep manufacturing away, so that was the intent of that. It's a pretty broad category. So, for example, if you get into some elements of that, it would likely be allowed in there. But it's really to try and prohibit a large manufacturer coming in that just does a lot of plating, more of an industrial type of use.
And lastly, we had a lot of discussion about the transit terminal. Did we figured that out, correct?
Yeah, the transit terminal, now I'm going off of memory, so if staff has other recollections, let me know. But we did allow for bus stops, those types of things, some type of transit through there. What we were trying to avoid is rail stations, but I'm not sure where we left that.
There's an exception in there, except to the extent required by governmental authorities. So I imagine if we decided we wanted a small transit center, we could do that. That's the way I read it.
Yes.
That'll come out in the circulation study.
Mr. Mayor, council members, also it's important to recognize those prohibited uses only restrict the private development. They don't restrict the city property. So that anything the city can do anything within reason, of course, but anything that list does not apply to the city portion of this.
Okay, I think I'm done. Thank you.
Councilmember Lord?
Well, you know how thrilled I am to have you finally come before us. So, thank you. A couple of questions. Again, guidelines, and this isn't the forum to talk about it, but I'm just going to mention it again. Architectural guidelines, improvement of some of them. Materials, when I was reading through this, I heard a lot of cement on the streets again. And I made the comment about West Core and how that street looked down their main street. Would like us to consider on those side streets and maybe on the streets going into the university, some of those areas that we look into something other than just total cement. I really appreciate the safety valves on this leasing. I think that's what makes, I'm going to talk for the rest of us, I think that makes us quite comfortable. That we do have some outs, and of course they also have them. One thing that does, a question I have on, since it's a long-time lease, tell me about the maintenance on the buildings. Tell me what happens after a certain lease. They walk away with a building that the city's going to have to put huge amounts of money in to refurbish it. But what kind of safety valves do we have on leasing as far as the maintenance?
Mayor and Councilmember Lord, we plan on addressing those through the CCNRs. That will absolutely, and we'll also have additional maintenance agreements that we'll work on collectively. But it will be addressed through that.
Okay.
We're looking probably a couple months down the road before we get into that. We want to get through the programming first, but that will be part of that.
All right, great, thank you.
Which protects not only us, but them as
Them
well.
too, of course.
Member Souza?
My question would be for Mr. Langford. Sir, you say you have 4 investors, including yourself, in this project. Is that correct?
Well, yes. I mean, there are 4 active members of our entity that all have contributions of efforts and talents and their own services as well as investment.
And at some time, let's say in the future, that you would determine that you needed another investor to accompany you folks.
Right.
How do you preclude an investor who in the past has defaulted on projects that they were involved in this city from becoming an investor with your group?
Involved with the
Financially
city?
with your group.
Well, was your question specifically about having done business with the city of Goodyear or just?
The city of Goodyear, yes.
Well, whether it's city of Goodyear or anywhere else, we're very careful with our equity partners, and frankly, we've been working with a series of probably half a dozen on our projects, Councilman, and we will probably look to them again because they understand our projects, they understand our quality, and we know them to be very solid and not having ever gotten in that kind of trouble. And
how would you determine that?
Well, just from knowing, in that case, knowing them for as long as I've known them, and plus they have to make disclosures and et cetera. I mean, if they have had some kind of a default, then that's going to be clear up front. Because our banks look at the same thing. Again, the analogy with the banks, even if we somehow didn't catch it, which we will, but even if we didn't, our banks are very careful with that same kind of due diligence. And I think they would be kind of in a parallel position to the city of Goodyear in that sense. Because they're a secured lender, you're a secured landowner. But, we've got a very strong and unblemished record of not ever having a default, not ever giving a project back in our history. So we're very careful.
Okay, thank you for your assurance. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple questions. Brian, were Franklin Pierce and UIW involved in this plan?
Mayor, the question, were they involved in what part?
In this particular plan? Has Langford received their input and responded to it?
Mr. Mayor, at this point, the correspondence has been more about the library itself, just in terms of trying to get a sense of the square feet, can it work? So we have had meetings with the Langford team and the libraries. There will be interaction, and we're looking closely at how do we connect. In fact, council did bring that up in between parcels F and G, where we're trying to connect to the universities, keep that wider. But absent that, they have not been party at this point.
But they have given inputs, and you've responded to those inputs, I assume. That's
Yes,
what I'm asking.
Yes, on the especially on the library, that's where we
they aren't
focus.
formal parties, principals in this particular
Correct.
situation. But certainly we want the library and the access there, too, to be reflective of what they think is important. And that's true. Is that correct? I think we've been told this, but I can't recall. We're putting 3 million gallons a day of effluent into that area. Who's taking that down? And is some of that water going to be used as an amenity in this particular area? Is that likely, or is that for later discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure I'm the best one to answer that. It's something that we have talked about, looked at, an ability to have water features there to include use of effluent. That's where we're at this point, but not where those will be, how much, those types of things. But it is a consideration.
Do we take down the aquifer, or does Langford contract have that done?
We are. We are. Let's put it this way. It's a combination. We've done some of the testing, soils testing on that right now, but we will be turning that on over to them.
And then the last point is, it's bothered me for years. Is there anything here in this that precludes us in the future from finding expedient and safe ways to move pedestrians to and from those four corners for example, if we wanted a bridge or a tunnel connecting those four corners, is there anything we're doing here right now that precludes that from happening? Because it wouldn't happen in the near term.
Sure. Or- You want to take that one, Rolf?
So essentially, can I interrupt here? So essentially, do we have setbacks that allow us if we had to go under or over on the sidewalk areas surrounding this? Because that's what it would take. It's going to take land in order to make that happen. And we talked about that before, and I think it's kind of just been put to the side. We haven't wanted to really address that.
Mayor, Councilmember Lord, we've looked at the surface circulation, so that's not precluded. But as far as tunnels, that might be a challenge, especially with utilities in place. As far as bridges, as long as we allow enough real estate and area in front of our buildings, we could accommodate that in the future.
Well, you know, Mayor, I know I'm taking your time, but because I have looked at this, I have given staff the example of the one on Camelback, where the Biltmore Shopping Center is. It's a real good one to look at. It tells you how much land you have to use. It tells you, I mean, it's there for us to look at to see if it's a possibility. And I think what the mayor is saying here is that, are we just going to depend on lights to get people across these streets, or are we going to have alternative pathways for them to take, under, over, around? And we keep ignoring this. And I understand that it's a lot for infrastructure and it makes it a little more difficult. But before we dig into this ground, I think we need to be searching this out. And that.
Yeah, you said it very well, actually. I just want to make sure that those who follow us and want a expedient and safe connection between the four corners and do not want to disrupt traffic flow in the main drags, that although we don't necessarily have to plan it for them, we want to make sure that we've left them the option of doing such things as bridging.
Certainly, the bridges and tunnels are still on the table, and that's something that we'll continue evaluating as we move forward with design.
And this design doesn't preclude that, is the question I started.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
Okay, thank you. All right, any follow-up questions? Vice Mayor.
One follow-up. What was the go, no-go date again, where we make that decision?
Go, no-go is September of '09. If we want to exercise any of that 36-month provision, or if we just want to walk away.
And then I would assume the schematic designs, the PAD package, design development, all of that stuff that would have been done between now and September, we would own. We would have paid for free and clear. If we all decide to part ways, we part ways, and what's done to date is ours and not proprietary information.
Vice Mayor, that's correct.
Okay.
On the public side, yes.
On the public side. Well, obviously, if we make a go, no-go decision, the private side's going to end up being empty dirt, so. Okay.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Okay, we've had the clerk read the resolution on the development agreement, and we've had a motion and a second. We've discussed it, and could we have a roll call vote?
Councilmember Cavalier.
Aye.
Councilmember Lord.
Aye.
Councilmember Holland.
Aye.
Councilmember Osborne.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Antoniak.
Aye.
Councilmember Sousa.
Aye.
Mayor Kavanaugh.
Aye.
Passes 7-0.
Okay, now we'll move to the lease agreement, and I'll ask the clerk to read Resolution 081264 by title only, please.
Adopt Resolution 08-1264, approving an option to lease agreement between the City of Goodyear and Goodyear Civic Center Developers, LLC, providing for options to lease certain designated portions of the city center, a development generally located on the northwest corner of Estrella Parkway and Yuma Road.
Okay, thank you. Could I have a motion, please?
We adopt Resolution 081264 as read by the city clerk.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Lord and a second from Councilmember Souza. Is there any further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Lord.
Aye.
Councilmember Holland.
Aye.
Councilmember Osborne.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Antoniak.
Aye.
Councilmember Sousa.
Aye.
Councilmember Cavalier.
Aye.
Mayor Kavanaugh.
Aye.
Passes 7-0.
Okay, thank you. We'll move now to consider adoption of a resolution for a settlement agreement with Sarah Chilton. I don't think so.
Mayor Kavanaugh, I will be recusing myself.
Oh, okay. And let me start with that. Councilmember Cavalier will recuse himself from this particular discussion. Okay?
Hopefully, just for Frank, hopefully the Patriots
I am not
Crushed
responding to that,
Because
Frank.
Marty goes to sleep early, that's why.
You're up,
Mayor
Sarah.
Kavanaugh, Vice Mayor
What's that?
Antonia.
Oh, I was just
Councilman
rooting for the Patriots as he goes home to cheer on the Broncos.
Okay. What staff is bringing to you tonight is a settlement agreement, which will effectively result in the assignment of Jack Rose's Civica, the Jack Rose Company's interest in all of the ballpark contracts over to the Wood family entities. It is part of an restructuring agreement that we've been working on for quite some time, but have never been able to finalize because of really the deterioration of the relationship between the Wood family entities and the Rose entities. As you recall, this project started, and it was a project, the ballpark stadium project started with a partnership between various entities controlled by the Wood family, who owned the property where we're constructing our spring training complex, and the developer of the project, which was companies controlled by Jack Rose. There was a number of contracts that have been executed as a result of this. There's 4 primary contracts that are remaining. We have a land conveyance agreement. We have an infrastructure development agreement, although that agreement has been terminated. We had a retail liner agreement and a development agreement. The land conveyance agreement, all of the agreements were predicated on this concept of a partnership between the Jack Rose and the Wood families, and the obligations went back and forth. All of the financial obligations were joint obligations for the Rose entities and the Wood family entities, and then the financial obligations went back and forth as well on the part of the city. For instance, under the infrastructure development agreement, because Rose was the developer responsible for paying the infrastructure costs, the reimbursements went back to the Rose entity with whom we contracted. All of these contracts were entered prior to the project being designed, prior to the funding that was obtained in this case. So they didn't really fit, and we ran into some problems with the infrastructure agreement, which led to its termination. We had financial security issues built in, but we essentially were paying for things as infrastructure was completed. We were allowing for reductions in the security that was provided as infrastructure was completed. It really didn't work once, but we didn't know that at the time when we entered into these agreements. About 6 months, maybe not quite 6 months ago, maybe 4 months ago, we started working on restructuring. We realized we ran into some cash flow issues. We also ran into some problems, well, not problems, but realized that we didn't need certain improvements constructed right at the outset for the ballpark to be operational. So we could have deferred certain obligations, reduced certain of the obligations, and still managed to meet the city's needs and still have a viable private development. We were making headway in terms of the restructuring, but with the deterioration of the relationship between the Wood entities and Jack Rose, we never finalized the agreement. The Rose entities are parties to these contracts. They have rights under all of these contracts. They have obligations under all of these contracts. The agreement that the city staff was considering was a restructuring of the infrastructure obligations, which would have
freed up some of the money for other aspects of the private development. We were looking at how we handled the security so that we would allow for reimbursements as work was completed and allowing for reductions of the security as the work was being completed, and we would have a little tighter control. In exchange, we were looking at the reduction of certain of the city's future financial obligations, specifically the retail sales tax reimbursements. The infrastructure agreement ended up being terminated. It kind of put a fly in the ointment, but what happened was because of the cash flow problems and we were being continued, staff was becoming concerned that we were going to have delays that would impact the opening of the stadium and effect, or that we would meet our obligations to the various parties with whom we've contracted for, mainly the Indians right now. So we couldn't resolve this without the restructuring. We ended up terminating the infrastructure development agreement. We drew on the letter of credit, and we're proceeding under the terms of the letter of credit, which essentially says that the city takes all of the money that it has not reimbursed from its $10 million reimbursement contribution and the letter of credit proceeds, and it completes all of the infrastructure that's identified in that infrastructure development agreement. Although that's where we're at today, there's still interest on the staff's part and still interest on the Wood family's part to restructure this agreement to reduce what is required in terms of the infrastructure and in exchange to reduce our future liabilities to the property owners, whoever that may be, in terms of sales tax reimbursements. The roads-controlled entities have come forward, and we've been able to reach an agreement that will take them out of the picture so we can move forward with the restructuring. And that is the settlement agreement that's presented here today. Essentially, this settlement will provide for a full release. The city gives all of the Rose entities who we've contracted with, and Jack and Vanessa Rose, a full release of any claims we may have against them, and they do the same for us. No one knows of any claims, or at least I'm not aware of any claims that we have against the Rose companies at this time, other than the straight contract claims, which would be assigned, their interest and rights and obligations would be assigned to the Wood family entities. Other than potential contract claims, I know of nothing else that we would have at this point. That's one aspect. Again, the Rose Civica entities would assign all rights, interests, and obligations they have under all existing agreements with the city over to the Wood family, which I think is specifically MPK Enterprises, which is a Wood family entity. And except for the ongoing obligation, except for anything to do with the Goodyear baseball, that still remains in effect. So this release and this assignment wouldn't affect anything to do with I think it's Civica Development has an interest and is a member of the Goodyear Baseball LLC, and none of this is affected by that. So under the terms of the settlement agreement, we'll have an assignment. Civica will be taken out of those existing agreements. We get a release. Civica will release, from the claims perspective, one of the claims that Civica has claimed against the city is entitlement to the $2 million reimbursement that our first reimbursement check is approximately $2 million. Their position was that was owed to them under the infrastructure development agreement. The Wood family, MPK, and the city interpreted that obligation as being owed to the M&I Bank, who is the lender on that. One of the things that happened when the Wood family obtained the loan, the construction loans for this project, was all of their interests and all of their financial entitlements under the agreements were assigned to the lender. And Civica signed off, they executed a joinder and consent. They interpreted that a little bit differently than the rest of the people involved in that transaction. So they were still claiming that there was the $2 million that we paid to the bank in order to make sure that the project continued on was essentially owed to them. It was a battle we were going to have to defer to a later date that would resolve that specific claim. So that is one claim that we would be eliminating, or one potential dispute, whether it's viable or not. It's still something that you'd have to litigate if we didn't resolve this. So that would be resolved as part of the claims to release. And then we have the, in addition to the assignment, we have the release of the mechanics lien. I'm sure you may recall, right before we closed on our property, a mechanics lien was filed against all of the property that had been under the Wood family entities by Civitera Design Build. That encompassed the property that we purchased in the option. It was recorded prior to our acquisition. Again, we had claims, or we had defenses against the application of the lien. We took the position that the lien wasn't valid, but this will resolve that. The Civitera Design Build will execute a full release of that mechanics liens. It provides protection against future liens in that they have represented and warranted that with the payments provided in the development agreement or the settlement agreement, there's nobody else is owed any money prior to our acquiring that property. There's about $200,000 worth of bills that they've submitted. We've agreed to pay that because the Wood family entities have looked at it and they said, yes, these are contracts and these are invoices for goods and services and labor provided out at the ballpark for work that was done. So we will use some of the proceeds that we took from the letter of credit to pay those invoices. But that should reduce the risk of any future liens that we have against that property. Part of the settlement involves the execution of a water lease for 70 acre-feet, and that was in conjunction with activities taken on by, I think it was Civitera Design Build, maybe it was Civica Properties, one of the Civica companies probably inadvertently violated the Groundwater Act by not getting the legal rights to, or not having the legal rights to withdraw the water. They had water for agricultural purposes. It wasn't being used for agricultural purposes, so it's a technical violation. We've agreed as part of this to cure that technical violation. Thanks. We've agreed to cure that as part of that technical violation with the lease, and that's part of the settlement.
Sarah, drink something.
Thank you.
We are all right here.
Okay. Thanks. The Wood family has done their part. I mean, I think that everybody's aware that there's an ongoing dispute, but as an effort to facilitate this settlement and so that we can move forward with the restructuring, they have agreed that certain money that was being held in escrow in connection with the sale of the option parcel, our acquisition of the option parcel, will be distributed to the Civica entities. So that's the reason that this really has been effectuated. The settlement is being effectuated by their willingness to step up to the plate. There's, from the city's perspective, the settlement is good in a number of ways. Not only do we have a resolution of any kind of claims under the agreements for entitlements by any of the Civica entities, which in and of itself is really a benefit, because we just, we're already involved in a lot of litigation for condemnations and things like that. It's just very costly. So we get those issues resolved, claims releases on both parties, but we get the mechanics lien released, again, avoiding any kind of litigation costs. And it will allow us to move forward with that restructuring that we've been working on for a number of months. Again, the restructuring is something that we look at as a win-win for the city. With the filing of the bankruptcy by the Wood family, there's concerns about having the funds to complete certain things. There is an enhancement obligation. We've committed to, for instance, artwork. If we don't have the restructuring, we're going to probably be on the hook for paying for this artwork. There's an obligation for the water feature that's going to be an integral part out at the ballpark plaza. There's a number of enhancements that we think that we can ensure are completed and paid for with the money that we have as part of this restructuring agreement by deferring obligations for infrastructure and eliminating one specific infrastructure obligation. So we look at it as a win-win. It allows funding. It will provide some excess funding so that the private development can move forward, which is something that we're all very interested in doing. As it stands now, and I think it was detailed in the information that was provided, we have the retail liner agreement. We have $1 million for security, but it's going to cost $2 million to complete. Without the restructuring, we'd be financing the $1 million and fighting over ownership of the retail liner space. So there's a lot of positives to the city for restructuring, and this agreement will allow us to move forward with that. I think that there may be some question as to why would we allow companies who've filed for protection under Chapter 11 to assume more contractual obligations. Again, there is a risk. I mean, in bankruptcy, debtors are allowed to reject contracts that haven't been fully performed. They're called executory contracts, so they would have the option to reject it. But if they were to reject it, we're not in any worse position than we are now. After the bankruptcy filing, we approached the Civica groups about payments that were due under these various agreements. The art payment, I think we billed them for a retail liner payment, which is supposed to be paid as you go along. We asked them for the letter of credit that was required under the development agreement to secure the obligation for the increased construction costs. And their position is that these were all obligations of the Wood family entities under a separate management agreement. So even though we had a contract with them, they had a separate contract, and so it wasn't something they contemplated of having to come up with these funds, which is, I think, one of the interests they have in saying, okay, it just hasn't worked out. We've kind of gone our separate ways, and we need to move forward. So if we kept Civica in, we wouldn't get the money. We'd end up really being in litigation trying to terminate these contracts anyway for failure to perform. So we're not in any worse position than we would be if, if we left the contracts where they were. In fact, we're probably in a better position because it gives us the flexibility to work with the parties to restructure. Any questions?
At this point, is Civica or any of its entities going to be involved in any projects in the ballpark area that the city is involved in?
Well, they are a member of Goodyear I think it's Civica Development is a member of Goodyear Baseball LLC.
What does that mean?
Goodyear Baseball LLC is our development manager. That's Eric Judson. And they have been the lead person or the lead entity in terms of the development and working with the teams and kind of coordinating with the teams for the development of the ballpark. They worked on but that part of it's gone. But also the practice fields for the Indians or the practice facilities for the Indians and the Reds. So they continue to play that role and be involved in that
When
role.
will that end?
Well, when the ballpark and the Reds facilities is completed. But again, Goodyear Baseball LLC is a separate legal entity. It's just that its two members are JMI Sports and Civica Development LLC. So it's really kind of one step removed. They don't have any day-to-day responsibilities for any of this. Our contacts are primarily, they're solely limited to the JMI Sports personnel, and then we coordinate with the Wood family's representatives and the Wood family.
When we rewrite this contract, In what way does this leave the Wood family whole, or at least?
If we restructure, what it will do is it will, right now, and I don't have the exact numbers, but say we have $25 million worth of infrastructure that's identified in that infrastructure development agreement. Under the termination provision, we're to complete all of that with the funds that we drew down on the letter of credit and whatever we hadn't paid out of our original $10 million that we were supposed to provide as contribution towards that. So I think we have we're pretty close. We might have a little bit more. Any excess would be returned, and it would probably return to the bank. But there is one huge piece of infrastructure, Bullard Avenue, that's $5 or $6 million that doesn't need to be built at this time. Again, when we identified all of this, nothing had been designed out there, and so timing was an issue. So what we would do is eliminate that obligation in exchange for the elimination of the sales tax reimbursement and the elimination of the bridge contribution payment in the development agreement. And what that would do is then free up, we have, say, $25 million, that would free up $6 million of it. Certain other improvements we could defer, will have to be done, but we could defer, for instance, Estrella Boulevard on the Southport parcel, where it's adjacent to the south parcel. We don't need that right now to support it will definitely be needed as part of the private development, but our engineering staff and our project manager said in terms of the functioning and operation of baseball from first pitch, we're okay without it because it's got the practice facilities down there. So we could defer that and wait till the new property owners come in, not new property owners, but the developers come in as they develop those pieces along Estrella Parkway. So we could defer some of those obligations, and it frees up the cash, the excess cash that we wouldn't use out of that, say, $25 million pot, and they can pay for the retail liner space, so we don't draw down on the letter of credit, and we convey that as soon as possible. We'll be working on CC&Rs, because as soon as we convey that, they can start leasing that. They'd like to get moving on that. We would have as part of the agreement, they would pay for the enhancements that we're already committed to. We already designed the ballpark plaza. We'll reduce some of them. We have a really nice project that's been designed, but we would be able to, instead of the $5 million in enhancement, we would reduce that down to whatever we're already committed to doing, which is the design which we're really happy for. And some of these enhancements, truthfully, staff wasn't all that thrilled about to begin with because they were costly for the city. When they first started, they wanted to put pavers on the roads, and from a maintenance standpoint, it was going to be very costly. But if that's what they wanted to do, we were okay.
This restructuring, does it affect anything that involves bankruptcy case?
Well, every agreement, including the settlement, has to be approved by the bankruptcy court. So, assuming council approves it tonight, it will be taken to the bankruptcy court council, or bankruptcy court for approval. And I don't see that anybody would have any objections to this. The primary creditor is the bank, and there's nothing in this agreement that adversely affects their position. Actually, it enhances their position because they no longer have the threat where Jack Rose and Civico were claiming that they were entitled to the $10 million reimbursement and the $2 million
That's
that was
out of
paid.
the question. That's out of the question, that $10 million?
Yes. Well, now we have it because we terminated the infrastructure agreement. So I think we paid about $2 million directly to M&I Bank so that they would pay Turner Construction. And then the next reimbursement we paid directly to, it wasn't even a reimbursement, it was a direct payment to one of the contractors. So, but the restructuring is something that would be very beneficial to the project and something that we've been working on for 4 months. But because the contracts were and the obligations were so intertwined because of the relationship between the Wood family and the Rose entities, until we were able to disengage that relationship, we couldn't do anything else.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Do you have more for us?
Nope, I think I
Okay.
covered everything.
Okay. All right. That's it? Sarah?
Yes?
Okay. All right. Any comments from the Wood family? Any comments from Civica? Any comments from the public? Okay. Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to read the resolution by title only, please.
Adopt Resolution 08-1269, approving, ratifying, and authorizing execution of full and final release and settlement agreement among Rose, Civica entities, and the City of Goodyear, and partial settlement among Civica entities and Wood entities, approving, ratifying, and authorizing execution of all agreements and documents referred to in the settlement, including assignment and assumption of city agreements and agreement for Type 2 non-irrigation grandfathered groundwater right lease, and authorizing and directing the city manager or his designee to take all actions and execute all other documents necessary to carry out the intent of this resolution and the settlement, and providing for an effective date.
Okay, thank you. Could I have a motion, please?
Move the adoption of the resolution is read by the city clerk.
Second.
Motion from Councilmember Susan, a second from Vice Mayor Antoniak. Okay, let's start over here. Any comments or questions?
I just want to double check my own thoughts that the outstanding billing for the retail liner, that will be taken care of with this.
Not with the settlement agreement. This is the first step. This just resolves getting, removing Civica as a party to the contract so we can move forward with the restructuring. And then we will bring another agreement back to City Council with the specifics about the restructuring, and that would be one of the provisions in the restructuring agreement.
Okay. In the settlement agreement terms that you have listed, number 6 states that the city and Civica entities more or less are having mutual releases.
Right.
Now, does that prevent us, and you said yourself you didn't know of anything at the time, but say a month from now, all of a sudden something comes clear in our future that we want to have some kind of legal recourse against. Are we saying here that we will not take action?
Yes. We would be releasing any claims, whether we know about them now or not, for anything that happened prior to this. The only thing is, from this agreement forward, whatever representations are in this agreement, but anything prior to this would be released.
And you feel comfortable with this?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, wow, I know you don't have a crystal ball. I understand that. So.
Well, I'm, other than the arguable breach of contract for the obligations in the various agreements that have not been satisfied, I don't know of any causes of action that the city would have against these entities being released. I guess we could file a wrongful lien claim against Civitera Design Build, and but we'd be getting a release that would be released as part of this. So, no harm, no foul kind of thing.
Okay.
And you can sue anybody for anything, and you can have all the claims you want, but can you collect?
Okay, so back to the only connection left then is with Goodyear Baseball. Would that then preclude that also? No, if there was an issue there?
No,
So
that's specifically carved out from that release.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Lord.
I just kind of want it simply put here, because the phone calls and the people on the street that stop me, there are some questions they've asked me. Is the lawsuit between Civica and MPK still on, between
Yes.
the two parties?
Yes,
Okay.
it does not resolve any claims
On that?
on that issue.
But we are totally out of that.
Yes, we are not.
Can't call us to court, can't ask for some money, can't do anything.
Well, I don't, at this point, as part of the restructuring, again, I don't know of any claims we have against the Wood family or that they would have against us, but we would have similar provisions in a restructuring of a mutual release as well.
The other question is, just pure and simple, we've talked a lot of figures tonight, we keep throwing this out and that out. The public wants to know is, how much more is this costing us? They just want a figure, because we say, well, we keep talking a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, but the public, and even myself, I get confused. So I think the public wants to know, all right, what is it costing us as a city?
If again, the settlement doesn't affect any of these existing obligations, it just transfers Civica's rights, obligations, and interests in the agreements to MPK Enterprise. So it doesn't really affect anything. But without a restructuring, and I think Larry alluded to that, there would be arguments that we would have to fund the cost of the retail liner space because there's at least $1 million because there's not enough money in the letter of credit to pay for that. There is an argument that we would have to pay for we wouldn't get the contribution for the bridge cost, the enhanced contribution for the bridge cost.
So basically,
we would have to pay for the enhancements in the plaza area.
Okay.
So those are I think Larry's already talked about that. The restructuring would address all of that. We would give something up for that. We would eliminate the obligation to construct Bullard.
Right.
We would
We'll
eliminate
give up some of those things, but we're not talking about we're going to give in any more money.
But we would also, but we would end up getting the retail liner paid. We would end up getting all of the artwork contract paid. We would end up having all of the ballpark enhancements, the plaza enhancements paid for. We would eventually get the Estrella Parkway improvements, but they would just be deferred. But we would be relieved of the obligation for the future sales tax reimbursements in exchange for the elimination of Bullard.
Mr. Mayor? The bottom line, I reviewed with you 2 weeks ago. The bottom line is we are exposed for $2.5 million additional.
That's what I wanted.
That's the bottom line.
Thank you.
And we will, especially with this restructuring, get that back.
That's
So
what
basically, there's
thank you.
no
I want that
increase.
said publicly from this tonight. That's the reason I'm asking the
Thank you.
question.
Actually, I think it's 2.5. Is that for the enhancements and then $1 million for the retail liner? So it's 3.5.
I wanted that in the minutes tonight.
It's 2.5.
2.5.
Thank you, but I have a couple more questions. People have also made comments about our contracts. We've had a number of developments that have fallen through, and they're saying to us, well, what are you putting in our contracts? What's the protection the city has? So there's concern out there.
May I address that, Ms.?
I'd love that.
Mr. Mayor, Ms. Lord? The city attorney's office and Frank and Gus Rosenfeld have done a fantastic job. These are incredibly complex deals, and the legal work has been fantastic because if we hadn't have had the legal work that was done, we would be in a real problem. As it is, we have had a way out of everything that we have run into. And so I think that the legal protection that Rorik and Sarah have provided it to us, and Frank and, I forget his name, and Gus Rosenfeld has provided to us has been incredibly good. And so from the standpoint of what kind of legal services are we receiving, excellent services, or else we would really be in trouble.
It's a cumbersome process. I mean, whenever a deal falls apart, it becomes very cumbersome, but there's a lot of protections that we have built in for the city with respect to these agreements, and, it all come out in the wash, so to speak. For instance, if we didn't get the enhancements, we could terminate the development agreement and be relieved of the $5 million sales tax reimbursement. But it's a very cumbersome process getting there and then working through these issues. And, there's always twists and turns.
Well, on a personal viewpoint, I appreciate the good work staff has done, but I just needed to repeat these questions because these are the constant questions we get, and this needs to be heard, needs to be recorded, so that people can say, yes, we did take your questions to the diocese, we did ask those questions. So that's the meaning behind all of this. The other thing we all have to face is that we are making an agreement with a company that's in Chapter 11.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have to be fully aware when we walk out of here tonight and people stop us on the street, they'll question that. I will say I have been involved with a company that was in Chapter 11. who came out certainly successfully. So for me, a Chapter 11 is not uncomfortable because I've had to deal with it personally.
Well, and that was the purpose of this Chapter 11, was to allow for the restructuring. And again, I appreciate that that would be the big concern, where is our risk? But our risk is we're no worse off than we were before, whether it is Civica, who isn't going to make these obligations because that wasn't the deal that they entered into to begin with. If that were the case and they existed, and that agreement was still in effect, we'd file a breach of contract suit and terminate the agreement. So we're not in any different position, even if we couldn't come up with a restructuring, and the Wood family entities that were filed for protection rejected these contracts. We're just in no different position than we would be otherwise, except we don't have to do it by a lawsuit. And then any agreement for restructuring is approved by the bankruptcy court, so there's no risk that that wouldn't be honored.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Any further comments?
I've made my comments, but I want to compliment Sarah for an excellent presentation and a complicated subject.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wright.
Councilmember Holland?
Well, Sarah, I think John said it very well, the staff, and you really took a very complicated subject and made it so we can at least ask some questions. I don't know if they're intelligent questions, but we can at least ask some questions about it. I think you've covered most of the bases. I think we were concerned about the $2 million. You explained that. I'm just really appreciate the fact that you just stuck with it and just drilled down to you could get us the answers that we needed, and the fact that this will allow us to do the restructuring that's necessary to move forward.
The Wood family and their attorneys have been very, very cooperative and really have worked with the city staff and through these issues in resolving this. The restructuring was Diane Haller's brainchild, and we've been, she's relentless in moving something through. So hopefully this will get us over the finish line.
Absolutely, and come a long way. It was worrisome. It's good.
Vice Mayor?
Like a polite Diane was a bulldog to deal with.
Okay.
Sarah, thank you. Very good presentation, and I too have maybe some naive questions, but I don't have a Juris Doctorate and don't claim to understand the law. So I've got a couple of questions, specifically in the notices related to the settlement agreement. I was made aware by a tenant that's at 3090 North Litchfield Road that they were asked to leave because the property was being vacated. I just want to make sure you have the address right and that gets fixed. So you might want to contact Civica Development and Rose to make sure that that address is correct.
We'll probably have to amend it. This was
Okay.
approved by their attorneys, so.
The other question I had is, when you go to Civigroup Company's website, it says that Civica Development is a division of Civigroup Companies, but I noticed we refer to everything in here as Civica and Civiterra. Is there any way for Civigroup as a company, as a parent company of Civica, Civicap, and Civiterra to come back at us? Are we
No.
releasing
All of
that dissolved?
All of our relationships are with Civica Development, LLC, Civica Properties, LLC. And it was formerly Rose Properties Southwest and Rose Properties Development, I think. They were formerly known as. We had no relationship with that separate legal entity. So it would all flow, their rights would flow through maybe their ownership of these companies. If those companies release all of their claims, they have nothing.
The buck
It
stops
stops
there, essentially, on their end, not on our end.
Right.
Okay. And then...
The converse is true, though, too. I mean...
Say that again?
The converse is true, too. I mean,
We couldn't go back up the food chain.
We couldn't go back up the food chain, no.
Right.
This is, whatever we have existed will be done here.
Now, as it relates to the projects that occurred out there, there was a lot of public procurement that took place. If there's any discovery in this process that the public procurement code was violated or any wrongdoing or improprieties, this does not release responsibility of that in any way, shape, or form, correct?
Well, public if public procurement were violated, it would affect the ability to be repaid. So this agreement's not, we're done. They're done getting any money from us. We're done getting money from them. So, again, I don't think that public procurement was an issue because we were involved. We controlled the procurement for that portion of the infrastructure that we were going to be using our $10 million for. And that was done with our engineering and our procurement people. So we're very comfortable that there was no Title 34 problem. When the city terminated the infrastructure development agreement, we brought forward a resolution. Again, we're using the same team, and we believe that that same team is just an expansion of the same work that they're already doing, so it would fall within that original Title 34 procurement for the work that we're doing, so we can pay them. But we also did an emergency declaration in case somebody challenged that and said, no, your original procurement didn't extend to this work. We followed the statutory requirements for making a declaration that this was an emergency procurement and that following the standard Title 34 processes was not feasible. So there shouldn't be a Title 34 issue there.
Okay. Beyond the civil issues, I mean, I don't know what goes into these contracts. I know there's the civil aspect of it, but beyond the civil aspect, if there's other wrongdoings discovered throughout this process, that's all outside of the purview of this agreement.
Only resolves any kind of civil claims that we have.
And then, if any of the banks that are involved in this have issue with the entities that are in this, again, the buck still stops back at those companies. So in the instance of M&I Bank perhaps having issue or taking issue with these entities?
All this does is resolves any claims between the city and the Civica Group entities and Jack Rose related to the contracts that are being assigned and for the work on the project up to this date. So it doesn't affect anybody else's relationship or their right to file claims or anything like that. M&I Bank would, I guess, as a creditor, have a right to object to the settlement agreement, but like I said, it really enhances their position as opposed to hurts it, so I can't imagine that a bankruptcy court, that they would object, or that if they did, the bankruptcy court wouldn't approve it over their objections.
Well, I'll be voting in favor of this, but Margaret, Ken, and Pug, thank you for your patience and sticking with us through this whole process.
Hey, Sarah, you've been doing this for months, and
yes,
it's very, very complicated and difficult. So, compliments to you for your professionalism, to the attorneys who supported your work, and the staff. The staff was deeply involved in this, providing the technical expertise.
Oh yes, everybody has their hands in this.
And your sleepless nights.
And to the Wood family, we are very appreciative for their cooperative and open attitude and professionalism also during this process. So, very unfortunate process, but we're making it through it. Roll call vote.
Councilmember Holland?
Aye.
Councilmember Osborne?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Antonio?
Aye.
Councilmember Sousa?
Aye.
Councilmember Cavalier? Oops. Excused. Councilmember Lord?
Aye.
And Mayor Kavanaugh?
Aye.
Passes 6-0.
Okay, thank you. Let's move to information or any comments or reports on events by council members. I'm City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, a couple things following up for tonight's meeting. Considering expanding the water audit to Lipscomb and many things associated with that, we will be looking at, is there any way to teach HOAs to do audits, numbers for and from water savings audits, monitoring indicators, doing a training program for water conservation, and promoting within focus and things like that. So we will look at all of that. Secondly, Joanne, we will, or Councilmember Osborne, we will get back to the council on what is the timing on the City Center Park. We will describe everything we can on that. Third, we will be looking at signage guidelines for City Center. Fourth, we will be looking at the architectural guidelines, the streets, streetscapes, et cetera, things like that. And finally, we will also be looking at the four-corner pedestrian crossings over, under, around, whatever. There are 4 other things I'd like to mention, Mr. Mayor. We are taking a look, the staff is taking a look right now at budget scenarios and trying to be proactive, and following up to our discussion of 2 weeks ago, we're looking at what if this continues to go down? Are we going to be able to be responsive and proactive as a city staff? And so we are trying to prepare budget scenarios that take a look at the different things that might happen. So I just wanted to alert you to that. We'll probably bring something to you in the next couple of weeks, but we are working on that. Secondly, I want to remind you of the tour on Friday of Bullard Wash at 10:30 at City Hall. Raul will take the council down to the Bullard Wash, look at the bridges, the wash, the work that's been going on there, the walkways and things like that, and the artwork that's going on in that. It's really an exciting tour, so I encourage everybody to take that if they can. Thirdly, the ballpark statistics. I am pleased to let you know right now we have sold 1,253 season ticket seats, have been secured for the 2009 season. Of the 442 season ticket accounts, 58% represent Arizona, 22% represent Ohio, and the remaining 22% represent other out-of-state accounts. So we're doing really great on that. Single game tickets will go on sale December 13th. Sponsorship advertising, we are finalizing 4 multi-year contracts for advertising, one with the University of Incarnate Word, one with EJM Development, one with Westcor, and one with Macayos. And so those 4 are in place, and we're just finalizing those contracts. We're also engaged in conversations with several other businesses related to sponsorship and advertising. So that's going exceedingly well. The last thing I wanted to mention is late this afternoon I got the sales tax figures from Larry. Good news. I mean, at least we aren't going down anymore. The total sales taxes, and I'll give you detailed information in writing, but the total sales taxes are up about $126,000. That's primarily because of construction sales tax is still holding its own. It was up almost $150,000, I think, something like that. Retail did take a turn and is up now. So it was just up a little bit, but it's up. It's better than down. So somebody's shopping. Thank you.
I'm buying.
And the hotels are up also. Restaurants are down. So.
You just mentioned, did you find out if there was that discrepancy in the last hotel?
The hotels went up but didn't go up that much, so I don't know. We haven't looked at that yet. So they didn't take a big jump. That's it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, inquiries of staff by council. Vice Mayor.
Just a quick question based on what you just said. The advertising contracts at the ballpark, do those have to come in front of us?
No, I don't think so.
They don't?
No.
Okay.
Nathan is in charge of that.
Okay.
Councilmember Souza.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, the National Cities Weekly came out last week, October 13th, and the main story in here is NLC introduces prescription drug discount program for member cities. We are a member city, and we can avail ourselves to this prescription drug program for members of our city. I would like to pass this off to the city manager and have him research it and come back to council with a recommendation or whether the viability is there for our city to participate in this program.
I can tell you right now, I'd be happy to do that, Mr. Sousa. We did it in Jefferson County because the NACO, National Association of Counties, offered this a year ago. And so our county offered the free cards. It does work. It gives discounts to people. It doesn't help everybody, but it does help some people. So now that the cities are offering it, yes, we can offer that.
Okay, sir.
We will check into it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thanks for the good news.
Meeting is adjourned.
All right.